Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this CREST webinar. Today we will be talking about neurodiversity in the technical workplace. And we have been so lucky to get some amazing panelists together today. So I will be handing over to them very shortly so they can introduce themselves. But I know that it's been amazing, and thank you so much to our panelists today for joining us. And I know the discussions are going to be really good. Before we just go into the introductions, just to let you know, as attendees, you have the opportunity to ask as many questions towards the end of this webinar as you want to. So please feel free. Now, I know what it's like sometimes when you're listening to conversations, you may forget your question at the end. So please feel free to type that into the question pane, and we will get those asked of the panelists towards the end. And I can always, if there are any questions that unfortunately we don't get to, then we will look at contacting the panelists if they're happy for that afterwards, to just come back with an answer. So thank you very much for attending today, and I'm going to pass over to your panelists to introduce themselves. Thank you. We start with you, Ed.
Thanks very much. Ed Hardy. I work for a company called Alex Partners in their cybersecurity. So I'm a management consultant, dyslexic, ADHD, all that sort of thing. And I've done most jobs in cyber in the 20 odd years I've been here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ed. And if we go on to Nathan.
Hi, I'm Nathan Chung, and I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD in early 2021, and I've had these conditions my entire life, and you consider me a late. I got diagnosed late in my life, so better late than never. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. And over to you, Lisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Ventura. I am the founder of Cybersecurity Unity. Like Nathan, I was diagnosed quite late in life as autistic, and I do a lot of work around neurodiversity within cybersecurity, as I've been in the industry since 2009.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Lisa. And down to you, Cassandra.
Hi, good morning. My name is Cassandra Pierre. I'm the Neurodiversity Affiliate President for Women in Cybersecurity, or WESIS. Our mission is to recruit, retrain, and advance women in cybersecurity. I currently work for a global bank in technology talent development, and I'm also a student working towards a degree in cybersecurity. And like other people on the panel, I'm also late diagnosed. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's really appreciated. And over to you, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I am a security engineer at Cisco, and I am also the vice president of the affiliate that Cassandra mentioned. I also was a late diagnosis 3 years ago as ADHD.
Thank you so much. So as I said at the very beginning, we're very lucky to be joined by everyone today, and thank you so much to our panelists. So let's get these discussions started, shall we? So one of the questions I think that gets asked many times within this industry and many other industries is, what is neurodiversity? So everyone out there has a different definition in their mind, thoughts on what neurodiversity is or means. So I'd like to hand it over to you, and so you can talk about some of your experiences and thoughts behind, what is neurodiversity?
Well, thank you. I think you're right. Everyone is going to have a slightly different experience and understanding of it. But for me, very simply, it's people's brains are wired in different ways, and there isn't a correct, wrong, right, good, bad. It's just the way your brain is wired. And for me, neurodiversity, particularly in the industry, is working the way my brain works, as opposed to masking or pretending or trying to sort of contort my brain into, I hate the word, but the normal, the regular, this is how you should work. And for me, the benefit is when you can stop pretending, you've got so much more energy. You're not wasting all that time sort of pretending to be normal and fit in. And it's wonderful having been on the receiving end of people who've treated me like that and let me grow. It's amazing. But it's also wonderful when you've employed people and you go, if I can create a hole that is the shape of that person's brain and pop them in there, they flourish. They work so much better. So for me, it's not fighting it, but sort of accepting that your brain is wired this way. Let's get on with it.
Great, thanks, Ed. And would anybody else like to talk about their experiences?
Can I come in on that piece? Because I absolutely agree with a lot of what you said, Ed. For me, being able to take the mask off, I didn't realise that I'd been masking my entire life until I was diagnosed. And then so much made sense in terms of why I struggled in a lot of different areas, why I struggled to fit in or just get things done or whatever. And it just was that light bulb moment of, my goodness, I have been putting this mask on all my life, and I can now start to take this mask off and be authentically myself. And also a lot of the things that I ask myself around neurodiversity is, who set what normal is anyway? How did that even come about? You go, how did this thing of what normal is, how did that come to be? And is it that we were at one point, did evolution go in this way? And there's just so much there that I'm just fascinated about and try to look into, about where on earth did this idea of normal come from, and why we as those that are neurodiverse are considered not normal. It's just something you can tell I've got quite an interest in and a passion about in terms of research.
And there's a really sad element of, there's a sort of implication of its lack of effort. That's the one that annoys me, is that it's, the reason you can't do that is because you're not trying hard enough. Everyone else is working really hard, and it's so disappointing when that happens.
I think that's one of the great things about the neurodiversity movement, is that it reframes just that, you're lazy, you're not working hard enough, you're not applying minds to one of providing inclusive spaces where people can kind of work in their own element, work the way that's best for them, unencumbered. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. When people moved back home and they were in their own spaces, and productivity surprisingly exponentially increased. I don't think there's a coincidence there. I think when people are given wide spaces to be themselves, to be authentic, and to do their best, the best comes out. And I think as evidence on this panel, you can see that people can be extremely successful when given the tools that they need.
That's very true. And I, sort of moving into that, when you've all, as you say, you've all got careers within the industry, and you've been in other industries, and all of that will flow through with you, all of those experiences and everything. So could you give some examples of your experience with how some of the processes had been really thought out and had helped you, or some of those processes that really hadn't been thought out and had hindered you in the workplace? And so if you could give some of those examples, that would be really helpful, I think.
I think what I will say before I answer that is, it's always amazing, the little things, I don't like the word accommodation, but the assistance makes it better for everyone else. It's not just a me thing. So sitting wearing noise cancelling headphones in the office, turns out everyone likes doing that. Turns out they don't like the big noisy environment. Having control of the lighting, so you're not sitting under those horrible UV lights. Turns out everyone likes that. Turns out, stopping the coffee machine making that infuriating beeping sound every time somebody goes near it. And things like that. But also and it doesn't even need to be anything formal. So, for example, I have a lovely boss who recognizes that my spelling is pretty awful, and it's not through lack of effort. So there's just an extra review of my documents before they go to a client. He's just super cool. I can send him a document, he'll review it, and it's not you've made a mistake. He'll just help me sort it. And it's things like that where they're going, we recognize what's going on. we are supporting you. And it's not a judgment. It's not you're a failure or you're a bad person. It's just you need some help with that. So we help you. And I also really like when they see it as a commercial thing. So it's not an act of charity. It's an act of our job as a manager is to get the best performance from these people. So we should support them and help them.
One thing that's great, that's wonderful, Ed. And one thing to add to that is what I tell people at conferences and my talks is it is hard for managers as well. If you think about it, you have to take into account people like gender, race, LGBTQ plus, etc. So instead of labeling people and putting us in these little boxes, how about just ask one simple question from manager to your workers? What do you need to succeed? Because that crosses all of that entire demographic. Just that one simple question, and that's so easy.
I think that's perfect. Yes, because and I've had this conversation with recruiting managers going, how do we possibly manage all of this? Because if you're saying all the bits within diversity are diverse, everyone needs other things. It's not rocket science. You ask them at the start of the hiring process, and you keep asking them, going, what can we do to help?
Yep, brilliant.
Yeah, I think that in our industry, there is sometimes, I think, not that idea that managing people is going to be different from managing products or managing systems or managing the processes that make a team work. People management is actually quite complex because in a lot of ways you can't just slap on a generalized way of managing everyone and expect it to work. For some people, they will thrive under that choice, but for many others, they will kind of flounder and not find their way. And unfortunately, sometimes when things are going wrong, there's not a tendency to curiosity. There's a tendency to blame or pip or something else punitive to address certain failures rather than the curiosity of like, well, what's going on? Is there a deeper reason? Or even providing the space to be vulnerable enough to say certain things, which is why when one of us speaks out and advocates for ourselves, it ends up having an effect across the entire team. Like if I'm not a huge meeting person, so if we're gonna have a meeting, I'm hoping that it's very valuable and that I know why I'm there and what's going on and what to expect and what to talk about. And comes to find out, a lot of people prefer that and would rather not have random meetings or an overload of meetings, and it greatly impedes on their ability to be productive. So it's a problem. I think management is a hard job, just like Nathan said, but that's kind of why you can't really make that choice lightly of who's going to be in that position, because some people are just naturally not inclined to those other nuances of what management might be. You would love that everybody is able to be managed in this blanket way because it makes your job easier, but more often than not, especially in our industry, I think that there's a myriad of people who work in different ways. So it's a hard problem. I think that even if you discounted neurodiverse people, you still have those nuances with neurotypical people as well. It's just not everybody works in the same way. It's why school too will work for some people, and some people will struggle heavily trying to do the same format. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I love your example about meetings, because that's such a who on earth wants to go to a meeting where you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know who's going to be there and you don't know what they're going to want you to do? How is that in any way productive for anyone on the planet? And it's just one of these things going, you did it for these people. You might save hundreds of hours a year of pointless meetings. And it's such a, and it's no cost. It's not, we need another 20 people to manage this. It's, we need to think for 5 minutes and send an email before we book a meeting.
And if I could just come in there, actually, you've made a very valid point. Do you think perhaps with the pandemic that might have changed that thought process for some managers, leaders, and how they think about meetings? Or have you not really seen a change because of that?
For me personally, in the beginning, there were actually way more meetings than normal. Way more. My calendar was so full all the time with meetings, and I quickly became Zoom fatigued and WebEx fatigued, and all of it was fatiguing me. But after a while, that was simply unsustainable. People would start seeing every meeting as optional because we had so many. It's like, oh, if I don't catch it in this one, I'm sure there's another one I'll hop on and they'll repeat what they said earlier. And so quickly things have pared down, and we've started doing on my team some more asynchronous meetings where we just talk and chat, and then we're able to like focus on what we're focused on. Or at Cisco, we have like I believe it's like the first Wednesday of every month is a focus day, which I wish there were like more of those, but focus day is like no meetings allowed at all across the organization, and everybody has to just get that time to focus on whatever they want. So over time, it's improved the way that things have been, but still there are always, I feel like there's just always superfluous meetings, and I just have to be more diligent about, I believe that this can be resolved outside of this meeting. How about I send you this? And if you still feel like you want to talk, we can continue that. But being an advocate for myself has helped more often than not with me avoiding just kind of going with the flow of it and trying to conform to what the culture says, and just knowing it doesn't work for me because I will just zone out and not listen. So
That's such a difficult stage to get. It's the phrase knowing yourself. I mean, that for me, that's, you know, I've got about 10% of that, and I'm 40 something years in, and I'm still trying to work it out. But being in a safe space where you can go, actually, before we have that meeting, could you tell me what it's about, please?
Yes,
That's a big step.
I think that is the point, the key point that you just mentioned, having a safe space where these conversations can happen. When an environment, a workplace is inclusive, we not only include our neurodiverse workers, but we also include our workers who have disabilities, right? And I think the pandemic was a huge catalyst in changing the way the workplace developed, where people were able to be productive at home and to hold down a job. We all know the statistics around unemployment for neurodiverse individuals. What I can say, which kind of aligns with what Steph said, is at the beginning I was completely overwhelmed. I went from meeting to meeting to meeting. And then, at some point I had to have that full stop moment and have a conversation. Like, if I continue to do this, I'm going to burn out. How can we change this? And I was able to have that open conversation with my leader at the time, saying, hey, I kind of need a flexible schedule. Can we incorporate that? I got a yes. Is it okay if I log on at 4 in the morning when I'm wide awake? Can I work then and do my work and then maybe log on later? And I got another yes. And all of these changes were able to get me to a place where I was able to be productive. Now, mind you, my colleagues may not have needed a 4 a.m. start time, but my manager was able to meet me where I was. I felt safe opening up and being honest, and in turn I was able to get the support that I needed.
I think for me as well, I've been working from home since 2015, so the pandemic didn't really affect me in that sense, but I made that move in 2015 without even knowing at the time that I was autistic and neurodiverse, because I was struggling in the office environment, the noise, the interruptions, the people, everything else. It was just, and I made that sort of choice to work from home and found that I was so much more productive once I'd done that. But the amount of calls when the pandemic hit, you're right, even just was exponential. It was like a boom. It was call after call every hour and stuff. And now I've started to put things in place. So I'll actually mark my calendar with do not book in specific slots, just so I can get a bit of a break in between calls, even if it's just for 50 minutes, half an hour, so on. And I always stop at around 12:30 every day. My husband stops what he's doing as well, as we have separate offices at home where we work in, and we'll have our lunch together, feed our dog because she's got a rare illness, so she has to have 4 meals a day with medicine, and always making sure we have that break and that bit of downtime, and that really helps for me.
Like you mentioning the dog, I got a pandemic dog, as they're called in the US. And you know what? My health improved
Yeah.
amazing. I was forced to get up out of my seat. I was forced to go outside and get fresh air, forced to walk him. It was probably one of the better things that I did during the pandemic, just to help with my
Yeah.
overall mental and physical health. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
That's great. Thank you for those comments. So one of the questions that we've had come in, because I was going to save them to the end, but I think this kind of comes in quite nicely. With everything that you've been talking about, obviously you were all quite diagnosed later on in life. So you've had a bit of a career, and then you've had a diagnosis. So what are your views on the root of the cause of a late diagnosis? Because we do hear that quite a lot through the industry, that people don't come in and they say straight away. So is there a barrier because people already know and are not saying, or is it just that people are finding out later once they get into the workplace? So what's your thoughts and views around that?
That's a really dyslexia, I was diagnosed young because my mum was a teacher, so I was fortunate she knew the signs and was ferocious enough to be unpleasant to teachers and make stuff happen, and so she was able to advocate. ADHD happened during the pandemic because I was really struggling, and I suddenly realized that without the aggressive deadlines on me, I couldn't, I'd much rather have 2 days to do 6 weeks work than have 6 months to do 2 days work. I just can't do it. And actually, it was one of my friends who got a diagnosis, and he gave me the blank questionnaire, and I just, oh, I scored more than you, and you got a diagnosis. I should go and speak to somebody. And it took me a while to pluck up the courage to go and see somebody, because psychiatrists, doctors, diagnosis about me, self-identity. It's a big step to take, even though I was in the fortunate position to be able to just throw money at it and do it privately, so I could do it whenever I wanted. It's a hell of a step to take about your identity and what will your colleagues think. And I'm sure nobody's going to go, "Oi, get out," but would it impact my career? And I've certainly heard, I don't know about you guys, but I've certainly heard from lots of people who have a diagnosis or think they meet the criteria but don't want to diagnose it because they're worried people will judge them for it.
Definitely. I think one of the big reasons why late diagnosis is prevalent, specifically in underrepresented communities, specifically with women, specifically with Black women, is because, there isn't enough data, right? Oftentimes we present to our physician and we share difficulties that we may be experiencing, and we receive another diagnosis, right? For me personally, I was in the mental health space prior to switching over to technology. So I had a little bit of an idea of what neurodiversity was and, the diagnosis that could fall underneath that umbrella, but I didn't think about it, right? For me personally, it wasn't until, like I said, the pandemic, where I started to have larger conversations. I met Nathan and I met some other people, and I started looking back at my history, looking back at my work history, looking back at, productivity, certain key markers that indicated that something else was going on. At that point, I'd already had a great relationship with my psychiatrist and a therapist, and we were able to have the discussions, and they actually kind of fast-tracked the process to diagnosis for me. But for a lot of individuals, specifically in the Black community, stigma around mental health, neurodiversity, difference, anything like that, it's just highly stigmatized. And a lot of people prefer to struggle in silence than to out themselves and ask for help, unfortunately.
And well said, Cassandra. And I echo Cassandra's comments. I'm an Asian, so my family came originally from China in the year 1900, but I grew up in Hawaii. But the Asian culture in general is a lot of it is based on thousands of years of Confucian thought, which emphasizes family and, lack of a better term, ableism. Like, you gotta function, you gotta work for the family. Don't make family look bad. Don't bring shame or dishonor the family. So what that does is create a wall, a tall wall where you cannot ask for help. You cannot say, I have this condition, I need help. You gotta hide it. You gotta essentially suck it up, and this sadly results in many in Asia committing suicide over it because they can't get help. They just go into decline, crash.
And just following on from that, Nathan, when I told my parents about my diagnosis, they completely dismissed it out of hand. So I had the diagnosis in writing. I told them about it. They took one look at the piece of paper, threw it down. No, that's wrong. You can't possibly be autistic. And I said, really? Why? The guy that's diagnosed me has been in this field for 25 odd years, and she's got a lot of expertise, etc. Why do you think that? Oh, because when you were at school, none of your teachers ever said to us that you might be autistic, so you can't possibly be, because if you were, we would have been told about it when you were at school. I think it was different times back then. I was at school in the 70s and early 80s. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't, teachers and education providers weren't made aware of it. And it was just that complete dismissal of, no, you can't possibly be. And I think it's because it reflects on them and reflects on their abilities and so on, that they have to just shut it down and pretend it can't happen. Go on, Nathan.
Exactly. And in Asian culture, it's even worse because of because science has proven that neurodiverse condition has a strong genetic component. So essentially, it does come from the parents. But in Asian culture, we worship and are almost pretty much required to honor parents and put them on a pedestal. So it makes the whole thing around neurodiversity very difficult, because what parents will admit that they cause their child to have this condition. Some parents would rather kill themselves or kill their kids rather than admit it out of shame, pride, honor. These are all similar concepts in various countries, but it is pretty much the same mass. Same mask.
Yeah. And I'm the same. I have family, 2 cousins diagnosed autistic, another cousin that was diagnosed dyslexic and dyspraxia. And had my son lived, he was stillborn, because of a rare chromosome duplication, I was told he would have absolutely been autistic had he lived. So very, very strong neurodiversity within my family. Still shut it down completely as if it just wasn't happening.
Yeah, I have the same issue or dynamic with my parents. My parents are Nigerian. And to this day, I don't know that it's properly acknowledged that I say that I have ADHD and that I've been diagnosed, because there's the cultural component, but also the religious component of just shying away from claiming those kinds of things, and, try harder, or, pray about it and maybe it will go away kind of messaging. So yeah, I think that that's the hard component, is when your parents don't really catch it and it's not something that you hear about, because, neurodiverse, especially like if you have a stronger case, you're kind of segregated from the rest of the population. So it's not like I heard people talking about, oh, my ADHD was flaring, or oh, I had this problem. And then in America, we colloquialize terms too. So you've heard a million people say, my OCD was acting up, or my ADHD was acting up. And they just mean like in a moment they were distracted, or they were like very hyper fixated on one thing. So you don't really get a full understanding of these things to be able to say, hold on, some of this sounds familiar. And I always thought ADHD or ADD was like a kid thing. And even my mom was like, you can't have it now, you're an adult. Like, so all of that kind of comes to it.
You know what? I'm happy you said that, Stephanie, because that is one of the largest myths / stereotypes of neurodiversity, that it only affects young white males, which is bollocks.
But so, horrible question, but given people's attitudes to it in families, what about disclosing when at work? So especially, it's fine for people who, like us, who are sort of established in our careers, and if they're not nice to us, fine, I'll go somewhere else. But if you're applying for an interview and you want accommodations, what do you think about disclosing that? Because it makes you vulnerable, and you're not going to get the
Take
help
that
without.
You know, I think the attitudes in the United States have a very long way to go around disclosure. I think the majority of individuals who have a disabling condition would prefer not to disclose prior to landing the job. Once they get the offer letter and they start and they meet their manager and colleagues, so on and so forth, that's usually when they have the conversation that they need additional supports. Unfortunately, I've heard a lot of stories of accommodation requests going wrong, right? And an employee unfortunately being, you know, pushed out indirectly, you know, from their job because they were deemed too much of a problem or they had too many needs. So the environment right now, I think in corporate America is one where this is still being felt out. There are a lot of companies that I think are further along on the runway of accepting inclusion across the board where people aren't put in these positions, but there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of work. And in fact, one of the top two requests made by our membership with WESIS was help with disclosure and help with getting accommodations, right? I think that is directly indicative to the environment that exists right now in corporate America.
Yep, and to add on to Cassandra's point, to share one horror story, I know one guy, he interviewed for a job, got the job offer, but as soon as he said he has autism and needs accommodations, the company immediately withdrew the job offer. It's shocking, but that speaks to the state of things in the US. Like as Cassandra said, it's a long way to go.
That is horrific, and it leaves the individual in a really vulnerable position. I mean, short term, it's no help, but I will say long term, I think they are better off out of, you know, that's not a company they want to work for, and that company has missed out on talent. But the sad reality is you still need to pay your rent and eat. It's a horrible situation, because how is somebody going to get through the interview process if they don't get the accommodation? And if they're going through the interview process masking, then, you know, it's hard for them to work out if they fit. I'm lucky, I'm proud that I work for a company that is incredibly flexible and goes, you know, whatever you need, get on with it. But that's rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is. There's a big difference in companies. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to you discuss was, you know, how do the companies that are doing it right show that to the companies that aren't? And if you've got people within the industry at the moment and are listening to you discuss this, how could they start to make that change within their organizations? You know, what is there to help them and for them to change people's mindsets?
I'm really happy you brought that up, because when one Googles, there are many companies that champion neurodiversity. You know, they have hiring program, but I strongly favor things like I used to be an auditor, so I strongly believe that could be the key. That's something from our cyber world. Companies should be audited. Like when these big companies, they say they support neurodiversity, but as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. They should be audited. They should ask people at these companies, are you being supported? Do you feel comfortable? Because to give you an example, I know some people at this one company, which is very famous for their neurodiversity hiring program. I heard stories of bosses bullying and treating their neurodiverse employees like garbage. Like, for example, they were having an autistic meltdown, and the boss belittle and like push further. It's like just laughed at them while all this is happening in front of all their coworkers. And this is at a famous company that touts their neurodiversity hiring program. Like things like that should be brought to the forefront, and made, advertised? Like,
I have to say, I think the thing that I have seen that has impacted diversity, and it shouldn't be this way, but the most successful thing has been parents getting into positions of power with a child that identifies as that, because suddenly things get taken seriously. Suddenly they go, if someone treated my daughter like that, I'd go for them. So I'm going to make sure that will never ever happen. But I think there's a mixture of people if people feel safe, they will be open and disclose, but that should never be a requirement. And asking and asking and asking every step of recruitment and every performance review and every stage, going, right, what can I do to make this work better for you? And you've started this recruitment process. Is there anything I can do? I don't need you to say you're autistic or say you've got ADHD or show me a certificate. Just need to go, is there anything about this process that we can do to make it easier for you? And I think you ask that at every stage of the process and every performance review, but also at the start of every single project. As a manager, you can see when your staff are having a struggling or having a bad day, and instead of berating them, just going, you look like you're struggling today. Can we do something to help?
Definitely. I think if I were a CEO of a larger company and I was having this issue, creating pipelines and pathways for diverse talent to come in the door, the first thing I would do is look at the gold standards, right? The companies that are doing it right, like Microsoft, I would say, is one of those companies that, they don't wait for you to ask. They provide the information ahead of time so you can choose whether or not you need to use those support services. I also think that leveraging community organizations that exist, like Disability In, I'm a volunteer for Disability In, and they are leading the way with research and best practices and industry standards around disability inclusion and inclusion as a whole. And then lastly, I think this one is pretty easy. What people could start doing right now is just embed inclusion into your processes, right? Think about the standards or the processes, the tasks that are embedded in that would support the widest amount of people. What could you do? What could you add to make a process more inclusive for everyone, despite what their ability level would be? I think starting there would move the needle a little bit further towards accessibility and inclusion for everyone.
And I think it keeps coming back. Everything that's been said on this call about adjustments makes things better for everybody. So, if you're going through an interview process, going, could we send the questions or the topics out in advance? Why wouldn't you do that for everyone? Because you're going to tell them what the meeting is about in advance anyway, or they're going to know. And this is not some sort of little school thing where we just want to test, can you recite meaningless data? We want to know, can you think and can you problem solve? And it's not cheating for them to be able to go and research in advance. So that just makes it better for everyone.
That is very, very true. And I'd come and work for you, Cassandra. I just say, after what you said, just definitely.
One day.
Yeah, one day. Let me know. I'll be there. And yeah, so listening to that, it's very true. It's about looking at individuals on a daily basis and saying, what do my workforce need? What can I do to adapt and adjust and actually get the best out of them? Because it is very true. We all have different abilities, and it goes back to a piece that Lisa said earlier. What is the norm? Who sets a norm? And there is no norm. We're all incredibly different, and there's 5 of you on this panel, and if you were all sitting around a table and you were discussing something, you'll all have different ideas and different thoughts. And the reason we come to a good conclusion about something or a good idea is because all of those different thoughts go in. If we all, in the theory, thought the same norm pattern, that would never happen, would it? So it's so true, and that's really interesting. So we are coming to the end, I'm afraid, and I've really enjoyed this panel session, as I'm sure our attendees have as well. And if there are any colleagues that weren't able to attend today, please let them know that we will be editing the recording, and we will get that out on the CREST YouTube channel afterwards. But if I could just ask you all to just leave one thought with our audience today that they could take away, and I know it puts you a little bit on the spot, but just one thing that they could think about before they leave today, that would be great. So whoever wants to start us off.
I can start. Oh.
Go ahead. You go ahead, Stephanie.
I would just say that you have to develop a trust for yourself, because no matter if you're neurodivergent or not, you know what's normal and what's not. You know what trying really hard looks like for yourself and what it isn't. So you kind of have to tune out noise and rely on yourself and develop that self-trust so that you can advocate for yourself when necessary, or you know to look and search, because I think all of us had a flavor of that experience, and that is what led us to a journey to just better fit in this world. So yeah, develop self-trust is definitely something I would recommend for anyone listening.
Great. I would say, I think this one is targeted to managers. If you have an employee that is struggling, before you move towards judgment, ask questions and try to connect with them, and be open to what they say. So.
Lovely, thank you. And who would like to go next?
I can go.
Great.
To add to a lot of it, one of the greatest challenges for neurodiversity is self-acceptance, because it's essentially a fight within ourselves. Like I myself, when I was growing up, I never wanted to be disabled. It's just so much negativity around it. So you got to be able to accept himself. And one quote from that show, Miss Marvel, I think it said it best, where she says, "There is no normal. There's just us and what we do with what we've been given." I think that says a lot.
Great, thank you. And Lisa and Ed?
I don't mind going next, Ed. I think for me, very similar to what Cassandra said in terms of approaching your managers, talking to them, and actually listening to what we have to say, and just be a bit on our side. And I think also for me personally, and it's something we haven't had time to sort of touch on a lot, I have experienced bullying in pretty much most of the organizations that I've been in. I've also experienced it from parents within my family, from friends. It's like it's been in every single area of my life. And in fact, I almost completely left cybersecurity as a result of that just over a year ago. So I just would say to just sort of think a little bit more about how you're interacting with people, and this is the way you're talking to people, because those experiences that I've had have been so horrific. I've almost come out of cybersecurity, completely, and I don't know if they just sense that they can do that to us, or so I don't know. I don't know where it comes from, and it's something that I want to do a lot more research into as well, and a lot more in terms of researching narcissistic personalities within the workplace.
Well, before I answer mine, I'm sorry you've been treated like that. It's fundamentally unacceptable. And I think it sort of leads into my point that you have to advocate for yourself. It would be lovely to know, and we should be able to rely on other people, but stand up for yourself. If it's not right, call it out. It's okay to say I am not all right. It's okay to say I need help. It's not weakness. It's not a lack of effort. People are unlikely to just spot it and help you unless you're in a very nice organization. So stand up for your rights. It's not It's not charity, it's your absolute entitlement. Stand up for it.
Wonderful, thank you so much for that. So yes, so sadly we have come to the end of the panel session. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists today. That has been really interesting, great conversation, and thank you to our audience for attending and listening. And as I say, there will be a recording going out later. When we do go out to our audience, just to let you know, the Neurocyber group have a project that's ongoing at the moment. They are looking to some people to take a survey just so they can put some information together and look at actions. So that's really good. They're doing a joint research project titled Neuro Unity, Many Minds, One Mission. So we'll send some information out to everybody to have a look at as well. If you have any questions after this wonderful session, thank you so much. Do send them in and we will get back to you. Just pop them through to marketing@crest-approved.org. So once again, thank you so much to our panel. Thank you to our audience, and wherever you are, have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.